All right, welcome to the February 20th installment of the CNAB community meeting. The format for this meeting is we usually kick it off with some demos. Then we have a fixed agenda, which is dropped in the chat channel there. Today on the agenda, we have some discussion about the security stuff, a discussion item that says alpha beta releases of spec, some discussion of storage of CNAB in registries, and then some discussion about credentials. So those are the main things that we have to talk about. I currently don't see any scheduled demos on the agenda, but if anybody has a demo, feel free to say something now and we'll grant you the time.
I think now that we made this an hour, we're not going to have enough content to fill it. Is that it?
All right. Anybody want to make a non-binding commitment to do a demo next week of anything? Is Michelle here? I think Michelle's not going to be able to make it. I know she's been doing some interesting stuff on import-export and might like to give an update on Duffel. So we can pencil in the Duffel team to give a demo next week. But if anybody else has one, feel free to drop it in chat or convey that to Lockie, who's the current note taker. Okay, I can kick off the first discussion item, though I admit the rest of them I'll be able to start off, but I'm not totally sure what the intention on them is. So last week I was supposed to give an update on the progress of security in CNAB, and we ran out of time, which we will have an overabundance of today. However, so we decided back at KubeCon in December, we decided to investigate whether to swap out the OpenPGP style verification mechanism with one based on TUF, which is the update framework, which is a high security specification for delivering software updates, and also In-Toto, which is a software supply chain tool, which in a nutshell allows you to define a particular chain of signatures that need to be made on a particular artifact before the artifact can be accepted. So many of us in here spent time reading through the specifications and trying to understand them, discussing things with the NYU research team that built TUF and In-Toto. And the current direction is that we want to propose switching from OpenPGP to TUF and In-Toto. So I've been working on a draft of the specification. What I'm currently thinking is that what we'll do is we'll remove the OpenPGP material from the 1.0 core spec. So right now we have the CNAB core spec, and then we have a phantom spec that will become the CNAB repository CNAB registry spec, but it hasn't been written yet. So I'm going to propose writing a third spec that will be called something like the CNAB security spec, and this will define how security will work in relation to registries and in relation to air-gapped network scenarios. And then that part will be the kind of thing where CNAB implementations can implement and be fully compliant with the CNAB core, but without necessarily having implemented all of that specification, which seems like the wise thing for us to do. So I'm currently halfway through the specification. I've written the part having to do with TUF, and my plan is by the end of the week to have a draft of the entire thing. In fact, I'm kind of hoping that I can sneak offline for a few hours today and work on it this afternoon, but we'll see. Okay, so that's the kind of update. Anybody want to ask questions, make comments, suggest alternatives?
No, I think that's great. Will this tie into the registry stuff then, or how CNABs are stored in registries?
Yes, because it will define how CNABs work with Notary, and Notary is the current implementation of TUF for registries.
Will 1.0 be the same time for all three specifications?
I don't know. It would be a laudable goal. It would be also some of what will go in this spec will be contingent upon what happens in the CNAB registries spec. So right now it's a little hand wavy. It says something like the tough protocol will be negotiated according to the object specified in the CNAB registry repository or something really, but we can refine that up. So it'll probably come after that one or in parallel with it, but I don't think it'll come before that.
I think it makes sense to have them stabilized at different points because obviously once the runtime is stable, that's already a useful outcome. And then the other stuff can follow from there.
Someone noted in chat, and I don't know whether it's Simon Davies or Simone, but
I think it's Simon.
Okay, yeah, there is an outstanding issue where there's a connection made to the Docker socket in Duffel that we do need to get cleaned up.
Yeah, we initially made that call because we wanted to have a Docker Swarm demo working, and we just never gotten around to actually removing that. So yeah.
Yeah, I wrote an issue about this because we identified that as a very serious security issue.
Yeah, so we should get that fixed up because there's no reason.
Is there also a scenario where someone would want to mount the Docker socket on purpose? Should we retain at least a way to do that if someone wants to?
I don't think so. I think you should, if you're going to talk to a remote socket, you should use a TCP connection. And then if your Docker socket has RBAC on it, then you can do proper user access control and stuff. I think there may be cases where people want to mount the Unix socket, but they're probably all for bad reasons.
All right, should we move along to the next item?
Yep.
So the next item on the agenda says alpha beta releases of spec in run up to 1.0. I'm not sure who added it, so whoever did.
It was me. Yeah, it was me. And I actually chatted to Gareth about this, and he's convinced that that's a terrible idea. So basically, the problem comes for the people building tools around this. You know, which bit of the spec should they latch onto to make a release? Gareth's view of this is that we shouldn't fix the spec because or we shouldn't have alpha or beta releases, because if we do that, it'll mean people will latch onto them and only support that, and then and then only latch onto the next one. So while it's moving quickly, we specifically shouldn't do that. So maybe well, it would be good to get other people's opinions on this, but maybe a good way of solving this would be something like asking when would the core part of the spec be v1 instead.
Yeah, there is a little bit in the repo on the process of releasing a final draft, but I don't know if we have a date.
Okay, I'll read that then. Thanks.
That's just it's more like an attempt to explain how W3 did it and how we're going to try and copy it, but it doesn't specifically talk about alpha beta.
Well, I guess it's also kind of a question to other tool builders. We're building Docker app on this, and we want to. If we say it's CNAB compliant, we also want the experience to be reasonably good. Say, for example, if you built something with Porter and you want to deploy it with Docker app, making sure it works is kind of interesting. So, how do we coordinate that? Do we not coordinate that? I mean, both are valid. We just need to kind of decide what we're going to do.
Yeah, I think if we do move the security and the registry work out of the core spec, which we're in the process of doing, we might be able to take a fast path toward a fairly minimal 1.0 core spec and then continue iterating on it and accept the fact that we will have a 2.0 spec faster than most specifications, that seems okay to me. I don't know how you all feel about that. When we say 1.0, are you thinking 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years before the next major version?
The fashion right now is to move quickly, right? And to have high version numbers.
CNAB 11.2.
Radu, what do you think? Because I know that you're building tools on this too.
Oh, Personally, I think the sooner we get to a 1.0, the sooner we're signaling to the community that we're ready to accept more mature tools and more tools to that. And I don't see any reason why we should be holding up the community from building tools just because we want to have something fully baked for 1.0. I think we should go ahead with the core part of the spec with the 1.0 whenever it's ready, and then iterate on 2.0 whenever.
Okay.
Do we have an idea?
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris. Do we have an idea of how many implementations there are of the spec in its current form? Because what is the current rate of change on the spec? And I guess we'd have to go and ask all the implementations if they're okay with cutting a release.
That's a good question. I think Matt's probably the most in touch with what the rate of change of the spec is. I think there's been a flurry of changes, but I think we're getting to a more stable point from what I've seen anyway. On the runtime part, that is, I mean.
Yeah, other than the open PRs that have yet to be merged, the next round of the spec, from my view, was to go back through and clean up and trim down stuff that's no longer applicable and move non-normative stuff out of the spec. And so I think I am unaware of any major changes that we had talked about for the spec in its present form. And by that I mean really the ones I am aware of are additive features that we could add at a later date without breaking compatibility.
There is one thing I don't know if we had a complete answer on that. For now, we have both the image mapping injection and the declarative image reference in the spec. Do we want to keep both, or should we get rid of the declarative way?
I'm not sure.
Simon, which declarative part? Sorry, I missed the latter part of the question.
Yeah, for now we have both declarative image reference CNAB spec and the image map injection at runtime, which serves the same purpose. And there was a question about should we keep both or should we get rid of the declarative way, which might not be suitable for every scenario.
Do we have an issue for this, Simon, to continue the discussion?
There was one. I don't know if it's still open.
Just checking against the CNAB spec repo.
Yes.
Did you open it?
Yeah, I think the discussion was part of the image map proposal.
Okay.
So it's probably closed now.
Yeah, because the image map stuff got accepted, so maybe it was brought up as a point in that and then closed along with when that was accepted.
That is possible. All right. Well, if we can track that one down,
I will track it.
If we have duplication, that's clearly a place we need to clean up. I guess it's duplication in the spec.
yeah, it's with the possibility of tracking other image types. There are a couple things we need to tie down by the end of this spec.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll track that one down and make sure that we have a final answer on that one. Lockie, it looks like 2 other agenda topics were dropped in by Josh Dolitsky in the chat.
I will add them to the agenda.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think where we are on this particular issue is that rather than attempting to do alpha beta releases, what we want to do is adjust velocity to get a 1.0 out fairly fast, then begin doing a 2.0 and roll over some of those other features to that. Does that sound okay to everyone? Would anybody like to express disagreement?
The only worry I have with that would be the storage stuff. If the storage stuff is not the same, it's not going to be compatible anyway, so it wouldn't be worth freezing the runtime spec. Maybe we need to stew on it a little bit.
Storage being storing CNAB bundles in registries, or storage being accessing storage from inside of an invocation?
Sorry. Yeah, I meant in registries. So if you have the bundle locally, you'd be able to deploy it, for example, but maybe not if it's stored in as a remote artifact. Maybe that's not a problem once again, but or maybe it can be a known limitation. It's just I just want to flag how useful it would be.
But would that be a part of the registry spec?
Yes, it would. But what I mean is the reason for holding the spec, for example, or putting out a V1 of the runtime spec would be to have interoperability between tools, because that's the only real reason. I mean, otherwise you can track your own version in your tool. But if you can't share, if there's no, if it's not specified yet how you share them via registry, or not officially specified, it may work between tools, but that'll be an agreement between the tool makers. So it might not be a problem.
All right, so I think even with that in mind, I think we can keep plowing ahead to try and get the core spec toward 1.0. And the registry thing is actually the next thing on here, so we can pivot over and talk about that. And if we identify blockers during the course of doing that, we can definitely hold on those spec, but I think that still makes it a worthwhile goal to shoot for.
Yeah. So I put this one on the agenda. Sorry, I stole the entire agenda. I put it down because last time we had about, I think, 4 minutes to discuss it. I proposed that we use CNABs OCI, which is a library we developed at Docker to do exactly this. It comes from work we did with our registry folks, the DTR and Hub people. So we're relatively comfortable. It solves the registry problems, the registry problem side of things. It's not just a bunch of client people trying to dictate what registry should do. I thought, so yeah, it's more to get feedback from other people about what they think. If anybody wants to know the rationale behind why we did it, I'm happy to discuss that as well. See, it's a much more contentious subject on the OCI calls than on other calls. So let me just explain basically the approach we took, and that way it'll hopefully be clear in people's heads. So you can find the code at docker/cnab to cnab-to-OCI. It's under the Apache 2 license, and the goal of the work we've done there is to hopefully get other people to use it, so that we can share how these things are stored, because we think that'll be a useful thing. I think what's key to the success of the CNAB spec is actually making sure that these are shared in a smart way. So that's the approach we took. It differs from what the Helm folks chose or are talking about doing. I think there are good reasons for that. Inherently from CNAB, we have the idea of multiple images that make up a CNAB bundle. So the idea of starting at an OCI index was a good starting point, we feel. The major drawback from that is that there's no top-level type indicated by a media type, but we were proposing using an annotation, a well-known annotation, an agreed-upon annotation, so that registries know from just looking at the top-level object what type of artifact that is. As far as I know, that's the only contentious thing about what we did with that. The idea was to reuse as much of the OCI's structs and things as we could, to make the efforts to make this work on existing registries as low as possible. Because if we want to go through the full adding these things to the OCI spec, it'll be a much longer process, and we will probably make mistakes along the way. So I see actually Josh is online. He's somebody who's been involved in lots of these conversations.
So Helm is doing things slightly different based on Steve Lasker's and Jimmy's proposal. I don't really actually have a strong opinion on how these things are being done on the back end. But what came up yesterday was an OCI mailing list topic from Atlas that was basically it was kind of like bringing up that registries should have these kind of different concepts, such as like projects, which would allow you to host a Helm chart and a Docker image and XYZ. And I thought that maybe CNAB might be the correct place to define something like this. And that was actually my topic was, is like, so Chris, what you're describing, is this something that you're saying would be part of CNAB spec? Or is it just how?
The way we've been thinking about this is this work was mostly led by Ryan Abrams, actually. I think you may have met him at the OCI meetings, but the logic behind what we're proposing is that we think it's a bit too early to add new types to the OCI spec, and so rather adapt or try and use what we already have, use annotations, and if we have a bunch of well-known annotations and we see that they're used a lot, we can promote them to proper fields and maybe even modify the high-level objects. In terms of
Go ahead.
Just because I think designing this with too much foresight will probably be shooting ourselves in the foot. If we try to find a generic solution to every single artifact that people want to store in registries, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot. So I think what we should do is kind of go with a bunch of directions, see what sticks and what makes sense, and then standardize on ones that actually work well going forwards. In terms of projects and how registries structure stuff, I think we could maybe discuss it here. I think most of the CNAB people, at least that are here, are mostly client side, so they don't have good opinions about registry stuff, which is part of the reason we kind of brought the
Yeah, so I think that the gist that I'm getting is that people want a place to suggest these types of things, and I'm asking, is CNAB the correct avenue, or should because like you said, that we're not going to get changes into OCI 1.0, like, so I think people want to build on top of OCI and just have an opinionated way so that Helm or CNAB or any other tool coming down the line can just plug in and get all these things. I'm wondering, like, CNAB is all about the bundle spec and all these types of things. Is this something that is appropriate here, or should I suggest that it's discussed somewhere else?
Matt might have an opinion on that.
I don't think we can have a good discussion about integrating various viewpoints on how registries should work when there's only one viewpoint represented in this particular meeting. I mean, the OCI discussions are probably where that kind of discussion ought to happen. I do agree with Chris that there is value in exploring multiple different directions for this, particularly when my view of what's happening is that there are a lot of very good ideas floating around, but all of them seem to infer slightly different use cases and doing some.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree with you in the short term, like, let CNAB go this way and Helm go this way and just see what sticks. I'm talking more like long term. I mean, all of these goals of like getting search and like a common search API, there needs to be like a staging ground for that. And I'm just talking more long term. And OCI is the obvious place, but there seems to be a lot of pushback on like expanding on top of the primitive.
Yeah, I think there's a reason for that. I think it's because it's I think the original intention with that was to provide function like the ability to store the low-level objects, but starting to define the UX on top is, I think they see as being out of scope. And so UX in that sense probably means things like search APIs or other things on top. I don't know if that's for good reasons or bad reasons, but I think that's why they push back so hard on that. A lot of that stuff comes down to maybe even PMs just wanting to differentiate their products, and so they push back on that. I think most of the people here, except for Lackey, block your ears. I think most of the other people here are engineers. So sometimes, sometimes there are business reasons or things like that. They may be pushing back on that stuff. So that's my guess. I think most of the people on the CNAB side are client side, so we would probably prefer if there were a common set of APIs, but yeah, it may not. I don't think this is a good forum.
Is this Atlas from the mailing list that's on?
Yes, sir. Let me just touch on, I mean, you guys are absolutely right that a lot of this stuff is out of scope for any project. And I think that's the problem with like a generic content distribution like system, is that no one really wants to handle it, or no one wants to like tackle the problem, because it's a hard problem to solve. I think the problem with like the OCI and the distribution spec specifically is that the distribution spec is tightly coupled to the image spec. Like the distribution spec only has 3 defined schemas, and one of them is like an error, and the other one is tag listing and repository listing. So not much functionality there. So in order to like add custom types or like support custom content, it's really hard to do that because you're affecting the image spec in the process. And there was this in the mailing list yesterday, someone brought up like the concept between Git and GitHub, where the distribution spec is only like the Git protocol, like the protocol that GitLab and GitHub and Bitbucket all use to retrieve like repositories. But the problem that like the actual issue that we're trying to solve here is that we want like a generic API that's able, like just like Git, but for like the like PR request and the issue request APIs for all of the other clouds. So we want like a generic API that will work for GitLab and GitHub, and not just like the Git protocol, but just all of the concepts, all of the search stuff. So so yeah, that's like my 2 cents about it, is that like there even though it would be nice to have these concepts, OCI doesn't want to do it because it's out of scope, and I just don't see how like all of the cloud providers are going to be able to standardize at the same time if there's no place that's like willing to take on this project.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you loud and clear, but just to, I guess, Josh's original question, we're probably the wrong group of people, at least from the people that I know here, in that we don't have the registry know-how to really, you know, to be driving things like that.
Right, and I wasn't saying that I wanted to bring the project to CNAB. I just wanted to like, I mean, I'm really like active in the like OCI community, but I really haven't ventured out to all of the like surrounding communities that like like the problems that we're solving are trying to like implement. So I just wanted to get y'all's opinion on it, because I see a lot of work that needs to be done on distribution, and I just don't see a lot of work being done for it. And it's all about I don't know, everybody's just trying to focus on their own, like in their own universes, and that's fine, because I mean it is a lot of work, and it has nothing to do with like you know, the concepts that you guys are trying to bring across. But I just wanted to bring it to light that it is an issue, and everybody's having the same problem, and everybody's wanting to like fix it in their own way. So so yeah, that's my 2 cents.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing is CNAB is not the place.
No, but there are a lot of us in this room who do have an interest in seeing that advance, and other people too, like Steve Lasker.
And I'm thinking that might be like a CNAB, not a CNAB, CNCF project, like starting out, just like not having not starting an actual project, but like starting a sandbox for a specification for like a package managing API or a package management or package distribution API. And then once, if we can get like enough cloud providers on board, and we hammer out a spec, I mean, it should be relatively easy to start a sandbox project for an actual implementation that everybody could start hacking on. What do you think?
It might be interesting to kick something like that off. I think given all the movement and all the different approaches that are being tried to store things in registries right now, it might require a bit of time to just see what makes sense. As Matt said, there are different use cases and different problems that people are trying to solve, and different approaches might be better than others, or different solutions might be better than others for different use cases. So I don't know if we'll find a generic packaging mechanism, but I think the best path towards that is to test a bunch of things, use annotations, well-known annotations agreed upon between tool makers, and see what becomes the trends, what sticks and why, and then try and either bring it into the distribution V2 or start something else on the side.
Right.
That's the way I'm thinking about it right now. But yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I've been working on this distribution for the past 3 months, and I can definitely say that annotations, like right now, annotations are the best way moving forward to, just defining your own custom types.
But, there's, they freeform fields, but if we can agree on, for example, the key, and we start agreeing on some values for that key, it starts becoming useful, and it starts becoming something that we can get promoted in the OCI pretty easily, I think, on the OCI spec. So I think Steve Lasker's example was the artifact type. We could start that as an annotation agreed upon by Helm, CNAB, and a bunch of other people. And then when we show the adoption, they will probably say, okay, well, clearly that's something that does kind of make sense. Maybe we should pull this into the spec, or have the broader conversation of how do we standardize these two use cases.
I agree.
So I understand the frustration of not having a perfectly clean spec for the solutions we're trying to solve. But I think we have to be kind of pragmatic and brutal and just say, right, we've got kind of the base types we need. Let's build something that works. The V2 is where we're gonna make it much cleaner.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Remember, users don't actually interface with the stuff. If we do our jobs good, it's just magic that happens behind the scene. If we do our jobs well, it's just magic behind the scenes. So, yeah, I'm not too worried if we use annotations and indicate what we want through that.
All right, so I think the outcome of that part of the discussion is that we are, for the primary item, we're okay with moving forward on CNAB to OCI as a sidebar. Anybody who's interested in diving in on Duffel and working with us on that, that'd be a great place to get started, because we basically have a bunch of old code we need to throw away and replace with that. And then on the main registry work, we should figure out a way to, probably the OCI mailing list is a good place for now to kind of continue a discussion about what we can do, and then perhaps spin off a separate project where we can cross collaborate between. Oh, and then the annotations part, which we can also agree upon, probably in the OCI list, since both the Helm and the CNAB contributors are on that list, right?
Yeah, I think Josh works across them as well, so we can leverage a couple of people who are working across these two communities to work on that. Just on Duffel and CNAB to OCI there, Seymour has just started looking at pulling CNAB to OCI into Docker app. So he's a good contact point if you need some help there. Ian Campbell, who's also on my team, is also looking at that. I don't know if he's on the Cloud Native Slack. I might need to tell him to sign up for yet another Slack.
Never have too many Slacks. And that goes for pants as well as. Okay. Naming common credentials. Are we ready to tackle that one?
I think I have one more question before we move on from the repo discussion. Regardless of where the actual implementation would land, what are the types of artifacts that CNAB would need to store in a registry? Because as the implementation currently states, we want to store invocation images and container images. Is there any other type of artifacts that we want to store in a registry, such as database backups, storage accounts, something else? And do we want to enable that, or just have a note on that part? We've been talking about the implementation for quite a bit, but I think the larger picture here, we've kind of skipped on what we actually want to store besides invocation images and container images.
So with the CNAB to OCI current approach, so long as you package your thing in a way that fits into an image or the image schema, anything will work. So it does give us a bit of freedom there. I think until we have examples of other things that are packaged in an OCI compliant format, we can't really give a strong opinion there. Like, how would you package a database as an OCI artifact? If it's as an image with one layer or something, that could be valid. But I think until we have examples, it's difficult to put that into the spec. We could maybe call it out and say that going forward, we'll look at that. One other thing that we don't handle in CNABs OCI right now is the idea of a thin bundle, but that should just be the config portion of it. So we can expand it to include that. Right now, it packages the invocation image and all the other dependent container images and pushes them to the same repo.
Actually, for the CNAB to OCI perspective, or for the registry perspective, there is no difference between thick and thin bundle, because for security consideration and access rights coherency, what we do is that we mount every image layer in the same registry repository as a CNAB bundle itself, and then we just create manifest OCI indexes and things like that to mesh everything together. And actually, for the OCI perspective, the thin bundle would be just the same thing, but without resolving the deep links into the actual images. So for us, thin or thick, there is no difference from that point of view.
Okay, but I think, yeah, I think your microphone is going in and out a bit, but so I think the difference is, there's very little difference. Is that what you're saying, Simon? Well, I understand, actually. It will still have the manifest at the top level.
Is that right, Simon? I think
if we oversimplify a little bit, the manifest themselves form the thin bundle. If you take the manifest plus the reference layers, you get a big bundle. It's a little more subtle than that, because we store one config as an image layer, the thing that stores the CNAB parameters and credential are in an image that we need when we do a thin bundle. But yeah, any more than that, just that the component images can either be downloaded with the main OCI index, or they can just be referenced to whatever manifest is defined by the OCI index.
Okay, cool. All right, so we can probably open an issue again on the CNAB to OCI repo to bring that up. I'll try and remember to do that tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and we should be clear on whether we want to have separate MIME types or distinguish between thin and thick by annotation.
Yeah, we might be able to just infer it. I think I have an idea of what Timor means in my head, but let's dive into it on the issue. That way we can put all the detail there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then Lucky Simon dropped a very quick summary of that in the chat. Yep. Okay. We feeling good about that one? Should we move on to the next one? All right, so the next item on the agenda was the naming of common credentials. So my understanding of this is that according to the CNAB spec, you can specify credentials in a bundle descriptor in a bundle.json file. My understanding of this is that the discussion is oriented around, do we want to try and provide some guidance as to what these credentials should be named?
Yeah, that's me again, sorry. As we dive deeper and deeper into this stuff, we find all these fun things. So originally I thought maybe we could say something in the spec. Gareth once again pushed back and said we shouldn't mention things like that in the spec, but maybe it would be good to align between developers again. So the point is, for example, if Helm needs Kubernetes credentials and Docker app needs Kubernetes credentials, it probably makes sense to name them the same thing. That way any higher level tooling can do intelligent things like recognize that it needs Kubernetes. That'll probably extend across to AWS credentials or AKS credentials or whatever else we have. So maybe just having a place where we have recommendations for that. Not, it's not compulsory, but just a recommendation. And so the spec is probably the wrong place, but somewhere else.
I was kind of liking the way that 800 section of the spec was starting to get fleshed out with some micro formats for targets. And I wonder if this is another good candidate to have sort of a micro format where we can point to it as a reference, but not necessarily something that you have to do in order to be compliant to the spec.
Yeah, or maybe even in the examples, we could point to that. But yeah, just say if it is in the spec, it needs to have a big may next to it to say, it may be like this or something like that.
The set of well-known actions that we put in the spec, I think we could generalize that to credentials as well, and maybe to parameters if that makes sense for some users. But yeah, I like the idea of having a common set of credentials and actions that tools can know they can act upon.
Yeah, so actually just to dive into the actions, at the moment we only have install, update, or upgrade and uninstall. There's probably some other ones. I know we used to have status, for example, and I think Simon put up a PR or created an issue talking about having some that we recommend, like status or logs. I think Matt and I actually chatted about this as well. And then just defining kind of what the outputs from those should look like. Before, status was a free-form text, but it might be more useful, or it might be an option to have a JSON output as well, or something.
Yeah, we merged that PR last week, and I just dropped a link into that one. But Simone had actually gone to some lengths to define the inputs and outputs of that as JSON, outputs as JSON, which I think is a very solid direction for these kinds of things to go. Do we have more we want to talk about on the credentials? Yeah, I think that was all the agenda said was that if we put them in the spec, they may not age well. But also align tool builders on common credential names. That's definitely clearly beneficial to all of us. Okay. So I think if people want to start looking at opening 800 level PRs on that, that might be one way of doing it. Or if people want to drop into the example repo and open and start some documentation there, I think that's an equally valid one. But
I think so long as we collect it now, we can always decide to move it later. So it's just about getting it all in one place, I guess.
Yeah. And probably if you're the person who decides to start working on that, you might want to drop something in the Slack channel so that other people don't end up trying to duplicate work and we have dueling PRs. I do think that's a really good idea, though, because I think it's very true. There's a lot of value to be had in standardizing on some of that normatively or non-normatively. Okay, next topic. Would CNAB be an appropriate place to host a spec related to storing multiple content types over OCI? Was one that got added a little bit late. Was that basically covered in the previous discussion, or do you want to take that away?
Yes, totally covered.
Totally covered? Okay. Oh, you even had the discussion with everybody. Okay, so we can follow up on that one. And then that would leave the last one. There was a Porter issue filed this week that suggested that we might look at adding a second language in addition to YAML, and that second language would be Lua. I think, Josh, you added that.
So I've been playing with Porter quite a bit, and one of the things I noticed is a lot of duplication, and considering that Helm is going to be using Lua in a big way soon, I thought it would be cool for a CNAB tool to also do something with that. So I put the link in the HackMD, and I see Carolyn's here. Is this? I'm also kind of trying to understand also what are the goals of the Duffel versus Porter, and I feel like doing something more than YAML would actually kind of solidify it as an authoring tool over Duffel.
Yeah. So as far as like this comes up a lot, Porter versus Duffel. The goal for Porter, so Duffel is a reference implementation of the CNAB spec. It shows you everything that you can do with CNAB without having really opinions about how you should go about doing it. Porter is trying to say, this is how we think you should do it. This is like our, Jeremy and I's, to be honest, way we think you should go about making bundles and working with them. And Porter is going to start, it hasn't yet, using the libraries inside of Duffel to implement, install, and a whole bunch of other different functionality that's there. And it'll become a single tool for interacting with not only authoring, but working with bundles. So you could be able to build, install, list, and manage going forward. I personally don't know a ton about Lua, and I feel really awful because like Brian Hardock is on my team.
I don't know much about it either, so I just
okay. So like you know, we personally like we picked YAML just because like I don't know, we have a lot of experience with it, so we went with that. And it was on our roadmap to make Porter work with one of our languages first, and be able to try out being able to do all the functionality, the CNAB functionality first, and then allow people to author in other languages that they're comfortable with after that. Lua is kind of interesting because it seems like it's a programming language, not just a markup language. It's not just a declarative language. So I think that opens up like a ton of new directions you could go in. So at the same time, though, I think that maybe could let us do a lot more and maybe needs more design than allowing any of the other languages. So I'm kind of hoping we can talk to some of the people who decided to do Lua with Helm and see if there's more we can do than just go, we support it as a language, but we just treat it like YAML. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And I was experimenting with this last night. So Go Fish, which is, I see Matt Fisher's here. He's using a library that converts a Lua table into a Go object. So similar to like JSON.unmarshal, there's like this library .unmarshal Lua global. And I think that's really all we need is that missing piece of the puzzle that ties that to the Azure Lua library. But yeah, I don't want to take up too much time. It's a fun topic. I'm happy to kind of spike that also. So
yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go for it, Radu.
Gareth also pointed out a bunch of other languages that might be suitable for this kind of work. Starlark or Skylark was one of them. Do we want to look at building a shim that translates a language into something lower level that Porter understands and can output this from?
The other thing I was kind of thinking after Gareth's comment, which was really good, is like Helm has a plugin architecture, and Helm it just runs some executable, and maybe although I'm very interested to do things just in Go because it's fun, but basically with Helm you can run a shell script or any sort of executable, and maybe we just need something that takes JSON in or takes a file name and spits JSON out, and then just spits it back to Porter. So yeah, I think either a shim or like something where you can kind of plug and play different languages that just kind of boil down to YAML at the end.
All right, probably the easy place to follow up on that stuff for now would be the issue queue, since very intriguing ideas there. Okay, so I noticed that when I refreshed the Markdown document, there is a demo today. Is that correct, Lockie?
Simon had put something in there.
Right.
So if he's ready, willing, and able, we're happy to have you present.
We can end it.
Simon?
Actually, it's work in progress, and it was more a suggestion for next week meeting.
Okay?
But I might not be able to be there, so.
I'll coordinate with Simon offline. So we can propose it for next week, and then we'll try Scout's honor to do it. He may not be able to make the meeting. Actually, I might not be able to either. In which case, somebody else will run the demo or something. We'll try and work out something.
Did you put up your Scout's honor? I didn't see it there, Chris.
Yes,
there you go.
Sorry,
Thank you. Thank you. Good.
All right. Well, that just sent us to an earlier end of the meeting. I thought I was going to have to squeeze everything in. Okay, so next week we've got a couple of, and we can end with this one. I was thinking while listening to people talk, one thing that might be a nice way to end out the meetings would be to open up a time when anybody who wants to point out issues in their own issue queue or with their tooling that they'd like help on, or things they'd like input on, could just drop things into chat, and we can translate those kinds of things into the notes, and people from this meeting might be able to cooperate a little more effectively while helping each other figure out how to do this thing. So we'll add that on and talk about it in more detail on the agenda next time. But if you've got a project and you have some known issues where you'd like to point people and ask input or ask for help, that'd be great.
Or any sort of questions that people who haven't been active so far might have.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I have a suggestion for Porter, which will be having a mixin that will be actually a CNAB caller, so that you could combine multiple CNABs together to make a single CNAB. That's something I thought Porter was before looking at it seriously, and that's something I would really like to do, like being able to get the output of a Docker app and add it to a Porter composition, and I think it would be really nice to put inside Porter.
Yeah, as soon as the CNAB spec has a way to communicate outputs from running a bundle, we can do that. And I would love to be able to do that. Jeremy?
Yep.
Yeah, Carolyn and Simon Davies and I talked about this last week offline in a different meeting. And I wrote a spec proposal to specify what outputs look like so we could start going down that path. I meant to add it to the agenda for this week, but I didn't, so I'll add it to the agenda for next week.
Have you submitted that to the...
No, I just wrote down to open PR today.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay, so for the agenda next week, we should probably add a status on CNAB Core 1.0, since we kind of committed that we would be making progress on that as an official thing. Anything else we want to make sure we add this week? You are, of course, free to add things over the course of the next week. And we currently have 2 demos on the list for next week, the Porter WSL demo and the Push Promote Pull demo. And Radu is giving us all a high five. Yeah. No,
if you've been working on an issue or PR that we haven't had a chance to look at, just feel free to ping us. I'll have another look at the Duffel PR queue later today, but feel free to ping us anytime on some outstanding issues and PRs.
Yeah, and I need to go through the CNAB spec repo. I haven't checked issues there this week yet either. All right, I think we can call it a meeting, and I will see you all next week. Thank you very much. Bye.